The US Secretary of State has openly blamed Russia and China for spreading disorder in Latin America. Mike Pompeo said Beijing and Moscow are fueling corruption and undermining democracy. Well, I'm joined from Bogota by Anastasia Maloney, who's Monocle's correspondent there. And also on the line we have Professor Steve Tsang, the director of the China Institute for SOAS at the University of London and an expert in what Beijing has said. So, Steve Tsang, this is not just a blanket accusation of Latin America being the subject of overreaching, extensive corruption meted out by Russia and China. He's pointing the finger very, very much at the regime of Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela and the fact that Venezuela has an awful lot of oil and China is the world's greatest importer of this stuff.
Well, that is true. And China is also a holder of a vast number of debt in Venezuela. So China does have a very strong interest in the country.
Tell us a little bit more about this strong interest. How has that sort of meted itself out? How has that displayed itself?
Well, what it really amounts to is that the Chinese government is a major importer of Venezuelan oil and make huge loans to the Maduro government. And therefore, the trouble in Venezuela does cause the Chinese some concern. But nonetheless, for the Chinese government, they are much more concerned in terms of supporting authoritarian states and not allowing them to simply be forced to accept American domination or American directions. The primary concern is to sustain the principle that any authoritarian government must be able to sustain itself, and it cannot simply be changed because of some rebels wants to change it, particularly if those rebels are supported by countries like the United States. And that is really all about making sure that the so-called color revolutions and such like cannot spread any further and cannot ultimately threaten the Communist Party of China in China.
Steve Tsang, thank you very much indeed for joining us on Monocle 24.